Hello, welcome to another of our series on creative confidence. I am very excited because today I'm here with a dear friend and a longtime collaborator, Lynda Deakin. Welcome, Lynda.
Thank you.
Lynda is the leader of our Design for Food studio, and she's really just pushed the boundaries of everything that we're doing in innovation and creative problem solving in the world of food and food systems. So we'll be sharing lots of stories today and lots of tips and tricks from Lynda's perspective about how to make change. And I wanted to welcome all of you. So I'm glad you're here, and I wanted to give everyone a chance. Please introduce yourself. Let us know where you are today. And if you'd like, we'd love to hear something that you're passionate about working on in the world of food or food systems. So welcome. But the reason we're doing this is because Lynda and I are both excited. We're going to do a little collaboration between IDEO and the Food Studio, where we'll be hosting a special learning cohort inside of our From Ideas to Action course. So that course is very much about ideation, beyond brainstorming, and prototyping. And we'll have a special breakout circle where we're gathering people who are also passionate about change in the world of food. That'll be at the end of February. So that said, I'm going to dive right in with Lynda.
Yeah. So when, I first jumped into food about 12 years ago, and in that time, we were focused a lot on packaging, things that made a noise when they hit the surface. And so we were helping our clients develop new packaging, innovative packaging. And that sort of evolved to what does that mean from a brand perspective? So starting to think about brands, and then, starting to think about experiences and sort of the world that brand and that product lives in. And I would say, it's accelerated pretty quickly, but we've seen a lot of change in the food world in the last 12 years. And as that change has happened, IDEO's process has evolved to be able to meet the needs of that changing landscape, as well as ourselves having more confidence in the type of work that we're doing in that food space. So, now here in San Francisco, we have a dedicated team of 25 people who've raised their hands and said, we're passionate and we care about working in the world of food. So within that team, we have food scientists, we have chefs, we have packaging engineers, we have writers, brand strategists, industrial designers, a whole mix of people that have basically said, I love food, it's my passion, I care about that purpose, that I just mentioned, and I want to drive change within that system. And so, it's been a great journey for us. It's helped us establish some key areas of focus that we think are important, not just for us to focus on, but that are mirroring some of the things we're seeing in the food world.
And so what are the zones that you're sort of targeting right now beyond just packaging, food design, brand?
Yeah. So it's gotten really broad. So there are four main areas of focus that we're working on. One is around sustainable food solutions. And, thinking about the fact, a lot of those things that I mentioned around water and agriculture and, thinking about what is a more sustainable way that we can be approaching our food system. So, we've been looking there at, how do we encourage people to eat less meat, or what are alternative proteins that are coming out that can be, a way for people to be able to actually eat less meat.
It's always fun when you guys are working on things like insect protein, because we all get to taste
We've
test.
Definitely done the bug protein project, but also looking at new ways of farming. So, if there are ways that we can still feed at scale, but use less water, and so looking at vertical farming and working with vertical farming companies. And so, that's one area of focus, just thinking about what is that sustainability piece and how can we begin to build a portfolio of work that sits within there. The next one that's really important to us is we're calling it culinary confidence. And of course, that is a build off of creative confidence. So we stole that from David. Sorry, David. But culinary confidence and sort of helping people get back in the kitchen. It feels like we have lost our way. And there are not as many people learning to cook. I think 50% of Americans don't know how to cook. They don't know the way around a kitchen. And I think what we've recognized is that when you learn to cook, you have a closer connection to the ingredients that you're using. You ask more questions around where that food is coming from. And so we've done a number of projects that just give people confidence, that help them get back in the kitchen and help them learn that, what we would call a life skill. It's not a lifestyle choice, it's a life skill. And we should all be learning those kind of things. The other area that we're very interested in is the overlap of food and health. And so, for us, what we've seen is these are two very sort of monolithic industries that, you know, historically have never had anything to do with each other. And, you know, there is this great quote, which is, we're fed by an industry that pays no attention to health. We're healed by an industry that pays no attention to food. And I think that's part of the problem that we're faced with now. You know, we've kept these two industries very separate. There's been a lot of finger pointing between each of them. And so what we're seeing now actually is that those worlds are coming together in really interesting ways. So, you know, there's a lot of, especially startups, doing some great work around, you know, the microbiome, and starting to think about, you know, the more we know about our microbiome and how that impacts ourselves. There's a lot of studies around, you know, food that actually helps our brains, and helps us, you know, is more effective for our brains, and really pushing towards this notion that food is medicine, and that we should think about it that way. You know, there's angiogenesis is basically using food as the way to treat cancer. And so I think there's some really interesting work on the forefront of food and health that we're really interested in, that we see as an emerging space. And so starting to grow a portfolio in that space. And then the last one I think is really important, and it's sort of what I mentioned in the beginning, is around transforming big food at scale. You know, we have to recognize that big food is a part of that picture. And a lot, obviously the first three I mentioned, a lot of work that we're doing there is with the startup community, but we have to acknowledge that big food needs to be involved in that conversation for us to really shift change. So that work has been around helping our clients orient themselves towards that change, build new brands, build new capabilities, disrupt themselves, you know, think longer term in terms of 5, 10, 15 years out. What will their offer be, and how does that make sense to the evolving food landscape? And so those have been the main areas of focus that we've been working on and sort of established our portfolio. So you can see it move from like packaging and brand to everything, basically.
Yeah, to healthcare and food and big industries and agriculture. It's amazing.
Yeah,
it's been an amazing journey to get to watch. And I can tell that you're lit up about this. It's amazing. I think one of the things we wanted to do today was really sink into that theme about transforming big food and creating change at scale. And I know you brought a couple of specific stories. I'd love for you to talk through them. A lot of what we want to do with our community is catalyze the community and help people do some of these things themselves. And so I think it would be great for you to share these stories. Each of them has a small nugget of a larger program that you were in. And I'd love you to share those stories with our community. Feel free to ask questions, everybody. We'll be taking more questions in just a few minutes.
So the first example is a collaboration that we did with Hyatt, the hotel chain, and the World Wildlife Foundation and Rockefeller Foundation. And so, you know, they came to us because obviously food waste is a huge issue. And, you know, 40% of the food we create actually ends up in landfill. And within that, you know, we know that the hospitality industry and buffets in particular, there's an incredible amount of waste. Through this project, actually, we learned that half of the food that someone puts on their plate in a buffet goes into the trash. So that's getting thrown away. So this project really, we focused on trying to understand, why is this happening, and how might we understand where we can impact and make change at different steps along that journey. So for this project, we interviewed the people that were attending the buffets, right? So we'd ask questions around how they made choices about what they put on their plates, and could we have done anything to sort of nudge them in new directions. We spoke to the executive chefs to try and understand, how are they ordering and how are they accommodating the different needs that might be coming up during the buffet experience. You know, we spoke to the people that were plating the food and actually putting it onto the trays and getting it out there and getting it ready for being, you know, put onto the buffet table. And a few things came back. You know, what was really interesting, well, one was, I think oftentimes when we think about trying to understand how we design better experiences, we go straight to the consumer. So we go straight to that person at the buffet table and design for them. But this is such a systemic issue. It's such a systemic problem. It's so interconnected and woven that you have to talk to all of the stakeholders. And so I'd say that's one big thing to take away is, if you're trying to design within a bigger system, think about the players within that system, talk to each of them and try and understand it from their perspective. And then think about, what are the collective insights that can be gathered that will impact that end experience. So a couple of takeaways that we had from that project. You know, we looked at how right now in hotels, there's these little signs, right, that nudge you as to whether or not you use your towel or not, right? There's these little signs. So we did something similar at the buffet
Oh, the
table.
thing that's in the room where it's
The
like,
thing
if
that's in
you
the
don't
room, it's
want,
like, if you want to reuse your towel, you know, try and be a little bit more sustainable and green, you know, hang it up. If you don't want to use it, put it on the floor. That's a conscious choice. You're making that person make a decision around how their choice will impact, you know, something much bigger than that. So we did something similar at the buffet table. We experimented, and I think there's an image that you can see. We experimented with these sort of smaller plates that people could actually decide, you know, is this the portion that you want? You can put in, and actually this is what it will look like if you get it. And then you could actually ask somebody for one of these. You could order these. Another thing that we understood was
so nice because it's so easy to prototype. You don't have to invest a lot
and
in that to just see if this little cue will fly.
Absolutely. And I mean, another thing to take away here is that when we're prototyping, all of our prototypes are very sacrificial. They're learning tools, right? We want to see how will people respond. If it doesn't work, okay, let's try something else and let's prototype a different experience. So, you know, those kind of things really help impact the choice that people make in that particular moment. The other thing that we understood was that everybody along that chain was sort of overcompensating or over-insuring for not being enough food. You know, we live in this sort of, especially in the US, we live in this world of abundance where more is better. And so what we realized that the person doing the ordering for the buffet was overcompensating. The person choosing and filling their plate was overcompensating. The executive chef, when he would look at, there was overcompensating. And so there was a lot of excess going into that ordering process and that ripple effect across there, which was really interesting. So one thing that we did was actually try and think about what is a way that we can use data and make it really human-centered, so that, you know, when people order, or you're basically, before you get to the buffet, you're telling people what type of eater you are. So we actually sort of made, you know, do you tend to eat bigger portions? Are you a smaller eater? Just to get more sort of context and granularity around the expectation, right? That not everybody is going to want to fill their plate with a lot of food. And so using that data and making it more human-centered was a way to be able to really get to a better solution, which, you know, within a very short period of time, the executive chef, he'd already saved, I think, 10% of the food that they'd been ordered. That had seen a reduction in 10%. So already that was,
and that at scale is massive.
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. That was, so that was a big output for us.
Okay, so I love the range of examples because I love the range of work that you guys do. So we wanted to talk about another one that was a different kind of prototyping, more focused on the business model, right?
Yeah. So this was a very rewarding project. So this was working with Revolution Foods. They're our neighbor right here. They're based over the bridge in Oakland. You know, working directly with their founders. You know, they started about 10 years ago, probably longer, 11 years ago. And their mission is to get healthy school lunches into schools across the world, serving, you know, low and reduced lunch kids. So for a lot of kids, this would be their only healthy meal that they'd be getting. So they have been incredibly successful over the last decade or so. They're now in, you know, many schools across the nation, and they're seeing a tremendous amount of success. They came to us because they wanted to think about what's next for us. Like, what is the next chapter of our business? How do we begin to serve communities beyond just the kids themselves? And sort of recognizing that getting healthy food into homes is just as important as getting it into schools. So we helped them by looking at their existing capabilities, you know, so they have these kitchens and that they basically build these healthy meals in various locations throughout the US. And how can we take those capabilities? How can we take our existing delivery infrastructure, and how can we build a new food offering? So that project was really focused on teachers. And what we recognized on that project, which was heartbreaking, was that teachers, these are the kids, these are the people who are teaching our children. They're working incredibly long days. They're going home exhausted. And sometimes dinner is a bowl of cereal.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's heartbreaking. These are the people that are sort of raising our next generation of
that's
of
their
kids.
medicine,
and
to get the fuel to teach the children. It's hard.
And so what we did was prototype a new delivery offering, or new service and delivery offering excuse me, which was getting meals that would be basically a sort of a meal kit that could be delivered to the schools for teachers that they could take home and prepare in 30 minutes or less.
Wow.
At a reasonable price point. And so what was great was we tested a bunch of these prototypes. So we took out, you'll see, I think from the image that's up there, we took out a few different directions, and we sat with teachers and we said, how does this feel to you? What about the portion sizes? When might you use this? How does this differ from what you're doing now? What are you replacing? And a lot of times it was replacing fast food and helping them get, for a similar price point, get healthy food on the table. And so this was a way where prototyping, getting in front of those teachers, sharing the ideas with them, really gave us greater confidence around what we needed to develop and how that would roll out over time.
Well, and it's also fascinating to see that lens being turned. Some of the things you're talking about, looking through the entire chain to understand all of the stakeholders. So understanding what the capabilities are in that company, and then how those can be leveraged for new impactful purposes.
Yeah.
All right. So there's one last story that I know you have for us today. And this comes back to where we began about really lighting a fire in someone's belly.
Yeah.
And so I know you have an analogous inspiration story.
Yeah, so this was a really interesting one. So this was working with a big beverage company. And, oftentimes what we've noticed in the world of food is that the way people think, it's within, they think about quarters, obviously they're thinking about quarterly earnings and those kind of things. Sometimes, they're thinking 1 to 2 years out, thinking about, an innovation pipeline. So that's sort of the time frame that most of the mindset is in inside big food. And what we've noticed is it's great for our big food clients to actually think much longer term, think about 5, 10, 15 years out. What are the sort of larger seismic shifts that are going to happen in the world of food, that they need to be able to put a stake in the ground that helps them longer term see the vision of where they need to go, but also will help them shorter term map that out and sort of how they get there. So oftentimes on these projects, what we say is, don't look to your category. Sometimes don't even look to your industry. Look outside for inspiration. Look at analogous things. So for this project, what we wanted to try and understand is we'd started to see some new behaviors emerging in this particular beverage space. And what we wanted to do is take our client outside of that beverage space and look at an analogous example. So we went to ChargePoint. ChargePoint is the company that, across the nation is responsible for putting in the little charging stations to charge your electric vehicle. Okay. And we went with the client, so the client is beside us, and we're asking this lady that we interviewed, and we're asking her, what have been some of the bigger shifts that you've seen, or what has been one of the biggest changes that you thought you didn't see coming to how you are building your business? And so the lady at ChargePoint said, what we thought was that we would put in charging stations similar to gas stations, that we'd have electric versions of gas stations. But she said, what we've seen is that people don't charge that way. They don't sort of wait and stop and sort of, they don't want to stand in a charging station and wait for half an hour or 40 minutes till their car charges. People are going to trickle charge. And they're going to charge in places where they are. So that's going to be in the grocery store. It's going to be in when they go to the pharmacy, they need to plug in. And so one of the things that did for our client was it reset her mindset around, if you're trying to design for the future, don't design for behaviors that are happening now. Design for behaviors that are emerging, that are going to be new behaviors. And so all of a sudden, our client had this sort of fire in her belly around thinking further out, thinking longer term about new behaviors that are emerging. And I think whenever we look to, outside of an industry to something that's analogous, it has you thinking completely different. It has you seeing things that you wouldn't see if you just focused on the industry that you're working in.
And how did that client engage differently after this point?
There was one concept that we were developing that was a further out concept. And, it was hard, I think, for a lot of stakeholders to get around it. And she fought and she fought and she fought for this particular concept because she knew it was going to meet the needs of people in the future. It was going to be difficult to do right now. And it was going to be challenging for them as an organization because that wasn't the business that they were in. But she fought and fought and fought, and the concept is moving forward because she knew, she could see because of that analogous observation that this was going to be a concept worth fighting for and that they needed to change the way they were thinking about getting ideas out there.
Amazing. I mean, there's so many things that I see in the stories you've just shared with us. I think one thing is that working across so many, not only silos within a company, but across organizations, when you're
Yeah.
talking about foundations coming together with
Yeah.
hotel industry and this woman needing to push an idea across multiple groups because it's always like a salmon swimming upstream, right?
Yeah.
And so you need that fire in your belly to stick with it long enough to make these changes.
Definitely.
And I think the other thing that I really love in these stories is that if we think about design thinking and the human-centered design process, when you're at levels of mastery as you are, you're thinking as much about designing for the people inside of the company as for the people out. Even more,
I'd say so now.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I know soon we want to turn to with the community is chatting up a storm, and I'll take one in just a moment. I have one more question for you that I'm dying to ask, which is what are some of the patterns you see for why innovation and creativity in the food industry is so hard?
Yeah, I think, I think obviously big food has been around for a while, and I think a lot of the processes that are in place they're institutionalized and they're hard to break. And so I think that's been challenging because there is a way, right? There's a sort of a set way to do things. And I think what we've seen is that because there is a way, it often means that companies are gaming the system, to get their ideas chosen. So if you put an idea into bases, we've heard this from clients, they can game the system to get the score they want so that they can push it forward. Does that mean it's going to be a good idea that consumers love? Definitely not. Might it work? Maybe. But there are different ways that we need to think about how we put concepts and how we drive concepts inside an organization. I think one of the nicest shifts that we've been able to help some of our clients on is recognizing that, if you're putting a concept in and trying to validate it, you should see that as a learning moment. That is not about testing. It should be a learning. And so moving from a culture of testing to a culture of learning, I'd say, is one shift that we're trying to push towards. I think another thing is, when clients launch a product, they want it to be, 50 million or 100 million within the first. So the expectations around scale, I think
immediately,
I think are also, those are the kind of things that happened maybe 5 or 10 years ago. You could do that. You can't do that now. And so helping our clients think about piloting smaller scale, helping a brand seed itself, and giving it time to breathe and grow and sort of find its fan base, having patience to do those kind of things. I think big companies really struggle with that. And you'll see that's startups are doing that all over the place, right? Because they're leading with passion. They're not testing everything to death. They're learning and they're prototyping. They're getting stuff out there. And so I think that can often be challenging. I think also big food companies have these sort of institutionalized sort of brands that have been around forever. And they're really nervous to change them in case, they'll lose share in the market or consumers don't like it,
or frustrate the people who've been with them for a long time.
But the way I see it is that brands are like people. They can evolve over time. And so recognizing that you can prototype with a brand, and a brand shouldn't stay static. It should evolve, right? And so being okay with taking some creative risks and taking some creative leaps to do things differently and seed a brand differently in people's minds. Those are some of the big ones.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm going to turn to some of the questions from the community. So definitely Peter K is asking, I've always been curious why fast food can't be made to be healthy, nutritious, and taste good. Like, what are some of the forces working against it that you've seen when you've worked with faster companies?
I think, a lot of it is scale and sort of the sort of spending power of where the food is coming from. I think a lot of it is also, honestly, on the food policy side, and sort of we're being sort of the way that cheap food is more accessible. And so they're getting not quality food. And so the expectation is that fast food should be cheap and it should be quick. And I think there are some really interesting companies out there right now that are challenging that status quo and that are saying you can have good food and it can still be relatively affordable. But, I think it's a long-standing battle. I think the problem also is on the consumer side, like hard for consumers to know what's in that food and thinking that a burger is a burger is a burger, or a taco is a taco is a taco. And helping them realize that the cost they're paying there isn't the true cost of food. You know, they're not really paying that taco that they're buying or that burger that they're buying. It should not be 99 cents. There are costs there, you know, that are happening elsewhere in that system. And so helping people realize that their choices are bigger than that. And I just hope that some of the sort of smaller fast food chains that are doing it right can actually get the scale that they need and actually have that fan base to help them grow.
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard to make those trade-offs when you're there if you're kind of stitching things together. There's another question here from Barbara O that's about income levels in food industry and how do we assure that people of all income levels have healthy foods. And I know these are challenging questions and just kind of things that we can't solve.
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think you know, I think most of it does feel like we're pushing to this. I see it anyway. It's sort of this bifurcation of the food system. There are the haves and the have-nots, and I see it becoming more and more extreme. And I think there's companies like, you know, Good Eggs. They're bringing, you know, local, you know, farmers market type produce to people, and you're obviously paying a premium for the service, but you know, there's definitely a price point that is there. And then there's people on the flip side that are oftentimes, you know, having to go to a food bank or eat something like fast food. And so my concern is that there is a lot of companies addressing the needs of the higher price point consumer and not really that many addressing the needs of the lower price point consumer. Some of the work we've been trying to do is around the notion of building a food pharmacy where you can actually help people realize that, and maybe it's a food pharmacy combined with a food bank where people can come and they can actually be educated around food. They can actually get the ingredients they need to make a healthy meal. They can actually take a cooking class to learn some of the skill sets they need. And so helping the focus shift to the ones in need, because I think there's a lot of solutions for people that actually they don't have as much of a need there. And so I just hope there's more of a focus to help that group of people who I think right now is underserved in the food industry and has so few choices to go to.
And it's so interesting as I observe some of the patterns across the work that you guys are doing. There are also these interesting partnerships. So whether it's a for-profit company, but also working together with a foundation or working together with the government or combinations of organizations like that to help us make some of those big leaps, but also doing them in a for-profit way that makes it sustainable for the long haul. So Revolution Foods, I think, is like a fascinating company.
And honestly, I think
space.
that's part of the issue is everything has become so siloed, and it's siloed inside the organization, but then siloed organization to organization. And I think, honestly, if we're going to solve for any of these larger issues, we've got to break down those silos and bring companies together that can solve for some of these needs. And like you said, that's not all going to be for-profit. There's going to be governments and, you know, policymakers and farmers. You know, there's going to have to be a whole host of people in that conversation to be able to solve for them.
I'm curious to ask, Jennifer is asking a question about so much to tackle when working within the system. Do you think on the whole it's easier to make change in big food at scale or small companies, small scale?
Oh, that's a good one.
I know it's kind of a
I mean, the impact is very different. You know, I think that we're trying to tackle it from both sides. And right now, you know, we have projects running actually that are on both sides of that spectrum. And so I think from a scale perspective, if we can tackle big food, I think the ripple will be bigger and it'll be quicker. I think if there's a lot of appetite, obviously, right now in the startup world, and the work is super exciting, and you're working directly with founders who are passionate and they care, and that's super rewarding, but it's hard to scale that really quickly. And so I think we have to be looking at it from both sides. And our biggest thing is, you know, when thinking about big food, we have to identify who those change agents are. And honestly, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. And so we're trying to figure out who truly wants to go out on a limb and who wants to do things differently and who wants to disrupt themselves. You know, change is not easy. And so finding those change makers in big food for us has been a relatively long journey. And I'd say we're just starting to see the success now. We're starting to see, and I honestly think that's a reflection of where the industry's at, right? They're sort of in panic mode and thinking, what is our next chapter? Like our sales are continuing to decrease and X brand isn't as popular as it used to be. So for us, we will see the impact quicker, I think, if we continue to tackle, or we'll see the impact scale more quickly if we continue to work with big food. But that small company, that's where it gets our juices flowing and gets us super excited.
And I feel like it's so important as a leader of creative things. We've talked so much about the need to have that energy to keep swimming upstream and keep fighting for the long-term goal. I think you need to, I know we always talk about like keeping those projects that keep you fueled and passionate and energized for that long haul.
And believe, don't get me wrong, that the small projects do that, the big projects do that equally. So like when we see that shift in an individual who is going to make a decision and who's going to bat sort of in front of their board of directors, for a change, a significant change inside an organization, that warms your belly in a way that working with a startup does too, honestly, because you really feel like you've done something. The change is coming.
So an interesting question here from Susan. How do I collaborate with big food when you're an individual? Do you have any ideas about what people can do in that space?
In terms of define, like collaborate in terms of,
is there any way, how can individuals push on big food industries? Or
I mean, honestly, the biggest way is to vote with your pocketbook, right? I mean, your purchase, your individual choices, those are felt, and you can make choices every day, right? You are choosing to do something or not do something when you put something in your shopping basket. And I'd say that's right now, that is being felt by big food. So consumers are making those choices. You can, engage in a brand, you can have a conversation with them and sort of communicate with them. But I think the biggest way you can impact it is by the choices you make every week when you go shopping. And I'd say that's been the biggest change I've made since working in food over the last 12 years is how I shop and what I feed my children and what I buy, and that is because I now have a more educated sense of what that food landscape is looking like and how it impacts, not just our personal health, but the health of the planet.
I know one other place that we're excited about is inside of the course that we're going to run. We're inviting people to participate, and our hope is to get big food companies there, small startups, people in healthcare, people passionate about change, and just stir the pot of that conversation there's always a community inside of our courses. And so it could be a great place to participate. Any thoughts on food delivery platforms? So there's Uber Eats, Grubhub, Caviar, and how they can support more affordable or healthier food choices.
Gosh, that's a good one. I mean, food delivery itself is really interesting because, everything is convenient now. Everything you can have, we used to be in that place where the question of what's for dinner, come at 5 o'clock, you'd be like, oh, I'm nervous, anxiety. Now it's like, doesn't matter. You can get your food instantly. In terms of how that can help from a sort of affordability standpoint, I mean, I think about some interesting mashups. I think about, food banks in particular and the stigma there is associated with going to a food bank and picking up your food. Like, what would a mashup be when a food bank works with somebody like an Uber Eats?
Wow.
Or, I think that's when it starts to get really interesting. And so how can we be helping those communities? That's why I get really excited about this notion of the food pharmacy and, helping people. Like, what would a food pharmacy and Uber Eats look like? If you mash those two things together and you're getting your daily or your weekly food delivered by, somebody like an Uber Eats, and getting that to the communities where they really are food deserts, right? They don't have the food abundance that we have in some of the places that we live. And so, I think that's where delivery can get food to places that they, just don't have access.
I mean, did you ever think you would be working on issues like that? Like, what's one of the biggest surprises that you never would have expected that you find yourself thinking about and in conversations about today?
I think it's the scale of it all. I think it's, and maybe it's a life stage, maybe it's an age thing, but I think when I entered into the foods landscape, 12 years ago, I think my perspective and what I got really excited about actually was brands and telling stories and building products. And I think now what I'm really excited about is the impact that food can have, if we do it right, on our personal health and on the health of our planet. And I think the conversation has laddered up to governments. Last week I was at the United Arab Emirates talking about food and food security and food insecurity and, global warming, and those are all interconnected issues now. I never expected that food would take me there. And I think it's really, it's challenging. There's a lot of reward based with that, but it's really challenging because the impact that you have, it feels so small, it's tiny steps, but from my perspective, even just in the last 12 years, I see the shift happening. I see the tide turning, and that feels great to be sort of in food at this moment, helping push things in the right direction.
Yeah.
That's where the biggest surprise has been for me.
So much change. I feel like the conversation around food has just expanded
Yeah.
so massively all around the globe at
Yeah.
the same time, and to be able to affect change in that is really amazing.
Yeah.
Have you some questions? There's so many and they're so diverse all over the map. But Joseph is asking, have you ever worked with universities or schools on food waste?
Yes.
Or have the interventions only been in hotels and other commercial spaces?
Have we worked with? No, we haven't. We've been talking to Stanford actually, because they have an incredible food program down at Stanford, but we haven't done a project. I think that would be really interesting.
But in K-12 institutions or grade schools.
Yeah, I think that would be incredible. I mean, for me, one of the things that I get most excited about is if we can work with kids, like they're our future, right? The kids are our future. And if we can teach them to make good choices and have better behaviors, then I definitely think that, they'll hopefully set us in a better direction. And I would love to be able to work in that environment and help there. That would be an incredible moment.
If you could pick any challenge to work on, what's something you would be really excited about?
We're really excited about educating kids in schools around food from multiple directions. So I think the piece that we're interested in is actually teaching those skills. I mentioned that I think culinary confidence is a life skill, right? So that's not being treated as a life skill right now, right? It's all about math. It's all about English. It's all about reading and writing. It's those three. And I feel like cooking needs to be up there, for us to truly reestablish our relationship with food and to build some of that skill set back. Like, we should be teaching kids how to cook. That is a lost art, and we should be recognizing that. So some form of getting kids in kitchens and getting them cooking and asking ingredient questions and all of that. And I think Alice Waters is doing some incredible work. And so that for me is a big piece. The other is, just in the canteens themselves, educating them around what they're putting on their plate and the impact of their health and making choices that are good, right? Don't just pick up the burger and the fries, go to the salad bar, put that on first, And so just thinking about what are different ways that you could design that canteen experience, even the cafeteria experience, to create better food experiences for children. If we establish those routines when they're younger, they're going to carry those through, it's been proven, right? If we establish those routines when they're younger, they're going to carry those through into their adulthood.
Wow. Yeah. Absolutely incredible, and so much opportunity in there. Funny story. I was just talking to a friend the other day, and she was saying her son was taking a cooking class at school, but the reason he was doing it is because he called it the eating class, and he's just always hungry. So he was just eating away. So maybe we just flip it to the eating class, and that'll help. There's some great questions in here about what's going on with retail and food. Any interesting things that you see in that space? Just interesting. I mean, beyond the delivery, but
I mean, obviously the Amazon Whole Foods thing is interesting, and we'll see how that plays out. I think retail is an interesting spot because we're so used to, or they've been so used to thinking about products differentiating on shelf, but so much of our shopping has moved to delivery. That retail landscape is shifting dramatically because the products are just not flying off the shelf at the rate that they used to. So there are just more options. So I think things that are moving to a smaller footprint, that we probably won't be going in and sort of doing our massive, once a week shop in a large grocery store. Like I see that shifting and moving to smaller footprints. I think things like, Amazon Go launched, I think it was yesterday or the day before, where you don't even have to pay anymore. So you walk through a turnstile, you download your app, you put things in your basket, you walk out. So I think there's going to be some interesting things there. I think the center of the store is a dying place. We've definitely seen in the last, 7 or so years, the perimeter of the store is where people are shopping now. It's where things are fresh. It's where, they can pick up things that are, they're more sensorial. They can feel them, they can touch them. And so that center store offering is definitely scaling down and seeing less traffic there in that space. So I think retail is interesting. They're going to have a lot of work on their hands, I think, in the next 5 to 10 years because those behaviors of consumers have shifted pretty dramatically.
Yeah, nice. Nice. Well, many of these topics we will be talking about much more inside of our course. I have one last question for you, which is more of a personal question. And so I think one of the reasons we're so excited to have you involved today is because you are such a creative leader. And so I'm curious, what's something that you personally are working on? I mean, all of us are constantly growing, constantly sharpening our edges, constantly practicing something new. What's something you're practicing right now?
I'm practicing. So I guess the thing, and this is probably evolved just in this last 3 or so years. I think I was a little bit reactive to our clients' needs, and sort of they'd come with a brief and we'd say, that's a great brief, let's do that. Um, or we'd say, that's not a great brief, and we'd walk away. But what I think I'm getting better with is being brave with our clients and actually asking difficult questions that have them question things beyond, just getting this product on the shelf, and have them question bigger, more existential questions. And there's a lot of bravery in that, because oftentimes they don't want to hear it, or they're not ready for it. And so the response you get is, pretty flat. But I think continuing to push that conversation and having faith that if you continue to be brave and push and push and push, it'll have traction. It'll get traction at some point. And so that for me, and also the reward when it pays off, when you do ask those brave questions and you do push the client to take a bigger leap and to do things differently, and to make decisions that are broader than their brand or their category, then that for me has been really rewarding. So yeah, just getting brave.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, I know that we're thrilled to be doing this collaboration with you inside of the From Ideas to Action course. So that'll start later in February, the tail end of February. We'll be having a special breakout group if you want more time from Lynda and some of our other really deep thought leaders and practitioners in the world of making change in the world of food. I just saw so many questions flying by in the community, from retail to technology to agriculture to policy to schools, just all over the map. And so we're hoping to gather as many members of this food community as possible so that we can continue the conversation while learning new skills about how we ideate, how we prototype, and how we use prototyping to push things all the way to the market or all the way to impact. So thank you, Lynda.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure having you here today, and we will see more of you soon.